nature provides so much of that sensory input that children need and have been used to for like thousands, since the dawn of humanity. It's like
Yeah.
a return to our origin, and that origin is still important for us. It sets in motion so much developmentally. So a child is born to this world very much still a hunter-gatherer. And what would a hunter-gatherer child want? It sees a rock, a stick, water. It understands that. There's no issues there. Like, I get this. Like, I can play with this. Like, human beings have been playing with this for thousands of years.
We can learn so much from watching the way children move, and in particular when they're playing with other children in nature. My guest today, Bianca Hagen, remembered being frustrated in school when she had to sit still and listen for long periods. So when she had her own children, she decided their education had to incorporate movement, nature, and play to do her best to ensure they would thrive into resilient, happy, confident adults. Learning so much about this for her own children led to wanting to help other children have the same benefits. So she started up Hidden Valley Forest School in Virginia. Whether you have young children, are a caregiver or grandparent, or even just reflecting on how movement made you feel as a child and wanting to find some of that joy again, Bianca talks about how important both nature and movement are in everyone's lives through the lens of childhood. I started this conversation reflecting on my own children's school experiences. So when I had my 3 boys, I was not even vaguely thinking about having anything other than mainstream schooling. The only thing that was different for me was that my wonderful flatmate, who was then turned into my bridesmaid, was studying to be a Montessori teacher when we lived together in London. And I just loved the whole philosophy of the child-led learning, and also the interest in nature and the world. And when my kids started school, they didn't have much of that, apart from the fact that my choice in schools, luckily for me, did involve outside space and some movement. But that's often not the case. And I think also people sometimes just don't think that there are other options, but it was clearly different for you, because when you had children, you decided that you wanted to make some specific choices, and that's what led to you thinking about this amazing school that you've set up in Virginia. So what sort of made you start thinking about how important it was to be in nature as a child growing up and in education?
Well, I guess we would have to trace back to when I first became a mom, because before that, honestly, I feel like I was like the majority of people, right? You just kind of, you kind of go through through life kind of, doing the things that you have always known. What we have always known feels more comfortable. And a lot of times that's more traditional schooling. That's more like sitting at a desk. And when I had my own kids, I don't know, something turned on in my brain. I started like really questioning a lot of things. I started questioning because I wanted to understand my children better too. I wanted to be a better mom. So I just started to like read a lot about, child development. I read about all the educational approaches. I just wanted to set my kids up in an environment where they would thrive, right? They could be not like the best they could be, but the happiest they could be. And I felt like if they were the happiest they could be, then they would thrive with whatever choices they would make. So a lot of my research pointed to Montessori, to these, alternative types of education like Reggio Emilia, and eventually to forest schooling, especially what they've been doing in Scandinavia and parts of Europe for the last 50 years. And it really opened my mind to, wow, like the importance of having children experience nature. And it also made me look back to the most significant experiences I had as a kid. And honestly, they always involved being out in nature.
Yeah.
And
so true.
concurrently with that, I was also reading a lot about movement, just moving more. like Katie Bowman and all those people. Like they really opened my mind to the importance of moving. Because to be frank, like I had been in gymnastics as a kid. I had been this high energy kid, but always kind of like forced to sit at the desk, forced to like listen to the teacher at the blackboard, And as a kid, I always felt very frustrated. So when I had my own children, I looked back to those moments and I started thinking like, if I could just place them in an environment that they wouldn't feel that frustrated, that they could explore the world more, then that would be great. So like the world of movement and yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to ask, so your own experience of school was one where you remember being frustrated by those circumstances?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know, for a lot of people, like school, the traditional way, school works. My husband is one of them. I mean, he excelled, he thrived, he did really well. But for me, my mom had to put me in gymnastics because I was always climbing up the walls, and so it was challenging for me to have to sit for hours on end and just listening and not really learning with my hands and not being able to go outside. Right.
Yeah.
So those both worlds came together, the importance of movement and, how children thrive. And they came beautifully together in forest schools because you get that fresh air. You get that child-led environment. You get the different terrains for movement. It's just beautiful. And it really became so apparent once I started my forest school a couple of years ago, where I just see children coming here and thriving and being so excited to be here with little. Like it's not like we're providing them this like high tech, this expensive environment. We're providing them the forest, like sticks and rocks, a creek, sand, like things that we like our natural playscape I'm referring to. But, and they just thrive here. And the funny thing is that the parents come back and always tell me like, oh my gosh, my kid is learning so much here. He's learning way more than when he was at the other school. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing because we're playing the whole time. We're very play based.
But obviously
they're learning a ton.
But obviously you must make them feel quite curious in their environment, curious in understanding their sort of place in it all. That must be part of the gift that you're giving them, that then I presume you hope then leads on to curiosity in life.
Well, yes, but I also believe that every child is born with that hardwired into them. It's in their DNA. Human beings are wired to want to learn, to want to explore. They're just born with it. I mean, a child learns how to walk and talk and learn the ABCs and 1, 2, 3 before the age of 5. That curiosity about the world and absorption of knowledge doesn't stop at age 5. And I feel like a lot of traditional schools feel that way, that after age 5, the child needs to sit down and there's only one way of learning. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, children never stop learning. They never stop having that enthusiasm. So in the forest school approach, what the children need, they don't need a biologist. They don't need, a scientist, although that would be helpful. But, they just need an adult who's enthusiastic about being in nature with them. That is key. Like, and anyone could be that. And usually that's a mom and a dad, right? It's like, oh, that tree is so amazing, right? I wonder what kind of tree that is, or look at this insect, guys. Like, we're exploring in nature with them. And then the learning just just takes off. It's just so natural. There doesn't need to be this over planning,
And you have it's multi-age, I presume. So what age does it go up to?
So currently my school goes up to age 5/6. So it's age 3.5 to 5 or 6. And next year we're hoping to add kindergarten through 2nd grade. So
which is
then
what age?
It would go up to age 8. About age 8 or 9. More like 8.
That's amazing. Yeah. And perhaps beyond. So I subsequently, after my kids were all in their schools, I found a forest school nearby that actually goes right up through the ages. It cannot stop if you want it to.
Mhm.
And my children used to, some of them spent some time there in the summers, and it was their
Mm.
happiest space ever, where they were
Yeah.
felt completely free. They weren't
Mhm.
free in terms of there were boundaries, but they really felt free.
Yeah.
And it was
Mhm.
completely all about play, and just very physical. And I wanted to talk about that sort of physicality of it, because obviously
Mhm.
with a school, like you're saying, so my children, I can't remember exactly what age, but there used to always be circle time on the carpet where you would read, and
Mhm.
they would be, you know, like in my world, down on the floor, where of course
Mhm.
they're able to wriggle and move, and it's important, and they respond to their body by changing position. And it's fine to do that. It's
Mhm.
quite amazing why it's fine to do that in that scenario. But then all of a sudden,
Uh,
they're lifted to chair height. And even in
mhm.
assemblies or whatever, it's all on
Mhm.
chairs, and they're no longer encouraged to get to the floor at really quite an early
Mhm.
age. And it astounds me really, because it's so important that we are sort of touching the floor, getting down on the floor. And I feel personally that part of the reason adults are less inclined to do so, or maybe a little bit abhorrent
Mhm.
of sitting on the floor, is just because they were stopped doing it so early.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yet I see lovely
Yep.
photos on your website and on your social media where children are sort of squatting down in nature, just, hands on the floor, and they're just not thinking
Yeah.
about it. Do
No.
you feel that that is something that in the way that they move that helps them with their learning
Oh
and
yeah.
play? Yeah.
Absolutely. And in fact, because we're expanding to include like K through kindergarten through second grade, I've been doing a lot of tours, and there's a lot of like new kids coming in with like my trial days, and it's become so apparent to me the difference between when a kid first starts and then like compared to the kids who have been here for a year and a half or so. When sometimes when kids start, they're a little more like, "Ooh, what's that? Like, where am I?" Or
Yeah.
like, what should I do now? And then like, fast forward a year, they're just such like, they're so independent, confident, creative, resilient, strong, so like capable of climbing things, jumping off, less prone to getting injured.
Yeah.
The transformation is so significant. I want to write a book about this. Like it's so impressive. And I want to tell the parents, like, oh my gosh, because it's really reminding me of how some children looked like when they first started, So I'm
Mm.
really seeing that stark difference. And like a lot of children nowadays, I don't know how it's like in England, but certainly here in the US, a lot of children are not going into nature anymore. They're not moving as much anymore. We're becoming increasingly a more insular, like isolated culture. We're all in our homes. Our homes are getting bigger. So like the yard, the garden that you have back,
Mhm.
outside is just not as big anymore. Like your house is just bigger. For those of
Yeah,
us who can, the people who can afford it, obviously, but like
of
middle
course.
class, like you see the houses becoming bigger. And you go to a lot of neighborhoods. And in fact, we used to live in one where children, like there were children there. Every house had a child, and you never saw them outside. There were never any children playing outside.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of factors to there, like, people are afraid of crime and all that stuff, but children don't come out anymore, and they're not moving as much with all the technology as well. But yeah, but here at my school, like I'm really happy to provide a space where kids come here and they move and play and explore and learn for like 5 hours a day, and we're
And
outside. It's
and
amazing.
do you find that when they then go home, do the parents report that they um have different expectations of their lives at home, if you see what I mean? So where before perhaps there
Mm,
was TV and screens and so on, are they more inclined to
mm.
sort of be more creative in their own space?
That's a good question. I haven't asked them that, but I would think that that's the case, or they might just be very tired because like I hear about kids like, oh, my son never naps, but when he comes here he often does nap. Like So I feel like it kind of wipes them out too, because it's like 5 hours, and sometimes when the weather is nice, it's 5 hours of us being outside, and we do move a lot. I mean, I always follow the kids' lead, but also try to kind of like, facilitate more like quieter times. But like, it just goes to show like how much the human child is so wired for movement, because that's what they want to, it seems like that's what they want to do all day,
And
even when they're sitting on the floor, they're moving, they're never
yes.
just still. There's no such thing as a still child.
And to draw back and sort of think about this from a human in general movement perspective, I think we can learn so much from watching children, watching the way they move, watching the sort of initial developmental patterns, but also their sort of ability to want to explore using their body. And even just that conversation about sitting on the floor and the fact that they want to move more. I find it so interesting that people have these ideas in their head that, for example, if you sit on the floor, you need to sit, cross-legged, and you need to sit in one position. And if you can't sustain that for however long, then almost you failed. When in fact, it's the absolute opposite. It's about being able to have a repertoire of different ways of sitting and allowing that kind of niggly feeling of, oh, I need to shift now, to let you shift, to get that extra bit of movement in. So actually, we could learn so much from children in that respect.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how traditional education. It's almost like, well, if you look at the history of traditional education, I mean, it started in the industrial age, and when we had factory workers, right? And we're still approaching education in the same way that we did back then. Like, we really haven't changed the format. But then you have like, like all these like different people coming in, with Montessori and Reggio Emilia. And those are people that actually took the time to observe children and sit down with them and design their educational approach based on what they were observing. So those programs always allow much more movement. And it just still baffles me that, even with a lot of people who are like educational experts, they're very tied to this traditional idea still of the desk, the chair, teacher at the blackboard, children be quiet, listen, like there's still that same format. And at least I know for sure that was my experience, growing up. And it just kind of at a certain point, it kind of dims the light a little, or significantly in some cases of the child,
and particularly for some children.
Excited, but
and particularly for some children who they actually need movement because of the way their brains are wired to be able to think better. And in fact, they have hugely creative brains, but that creativity is almost slightly dampened by the fact that they're told to move less. And again, I almost think the same is probably true of adults. The fact that we are finding ourselves potentially sat, if you're doing a desk job for 8 hours a day, it amazes me that we expect of the people doing those jobs creativity and productivity when they're so sort of stifled and all their physiology and their internal systems have slowed down to not very much. To then expect that with the lack of blood flow to the brain, us to be doing good jobs is amazing. Hence why, as you know, we talk a lot about movement breaks and how important that is. I wanted to just go on. Sorry, no, fire away.
I just want to make just one quick point before I forget it. But I want to say that some of the kids that come to my program, perhaps in a more traditional setting, they would have become an issue because they want to move more. They don't necessarily want to sit and for what feels for them hours at a time. They want to have agency, in their life experience. If they want to grab a block and build it, they want to do it. They don't want to all necessarily, especially at that young age, be told that, no, we're going to like sit right now and do some worksheets. Like some of those kids might have, been an issue in more traditional settings, but they come here and they become leaders. They're leaders. Like they're like they're like the other kids just look up at them like, oh my gosh, I want to do what he's doing. And he gets that kid gets so much confidence, So it's like the environment is kind of And what is the internal message that that kid is downloading for the rest of his life? Am
Yeah.
I going to be an issue? Or right here, like, wow, I'm a leader. Like people like my ideas. I have important ideas to contribute. So maybe, yeah, I always feel like the environment can set in motion so many things, depending on the child.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And um the nice thing as well, I presume in your space is that there's a whole variety of nature. So it's forest school, but I believe you have water there, and so you have obviously got space. You got the trees to touch and play with, and so on. So I presume
Mhm.
that it's a very sensory experience as well. And I think that's what's also dampened and shut down in traditional schools, is this inability
Mhm.
to have that sort of sensory experience that I see so many kids. You can see kids that like to sort of play with their clothing or whatever, because they're desperately
Mhm.
wanting this sort of sensory
Yeah.
um way into the world, and yet that's potentially shut
Mhm.
down. But you're providing that in nature, aren't you?
Oh yeah, it's everywhere, right? I mean, and it just goes to show too, like how our DNA is, we're still very much hunter gatherers, like, okay, we're modern human beings, we're more civilized, but like our DNA, we haven't changed much since we were hunter gatherers. And so a child is born to this world very much still a hunter gatherer. And what would a hunter gatherer child want? It sees a rock, a stick, water, it understands that,
Mm.
there's no issues there, like I get this, like I can play with this, like human beings have been playing with this for thousands of years, as opposed to a child who's like maybe born in, like my first one was, I was still very much like doing things, like all how I had always done. I was more like indoors, so it's like that artificial lights and the plastic toys, and she had a lot more meltdowns compared to my two youngest, and so yeah, the nature provides so much of that sensory input that children need and have been used to for like thousands, since the dawn of humanity. It's like we're
Yeah.
a return to our origin, and that origin is still important for us. It sets in motion so much developmentally, right?
Yeah, you're so right. And it is a really short time in historical terms that we have boxed ourselves in this way and created these artificial environments. And I feel it myself. As soon as I step outside the door, even, one sniff of fresh air, it doesn't even need to be in nature, just literally going from inside my box to outside, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately my mind shifts. Immediately I feel so much better for that shift in environment. And
Mm-hmm.
why is that? Well, it's obvious. It's because it's going back to where we came from, and physically, again, back to movement. It's much
Mm-hmm.
harder to move indoors. And this is why people really struggle with not being sedentary, and kids not being sedentary, when the
Mm-hmm.
whole world is set up to be sedentary, with
Oh, yeah.
sofas, with all the screens that, are so useful in some ways to bring us across. We have such a connected world. We've learned so much about other environments, but we're seeing them through a
Mm-hmm.
screen. And there's even science now
Right.
that says that you can get benefit from staring at images of wildlife, which is great, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
not the same. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't want to be encouraging that. We want to be encouraging people to just get outside, and be
Mm-hmm.
and see how they feel in that environment, because I think it's trying to create that connection within the
Mm-hmm.
person, which you're doing within children. So I am sure these children are going to be very connected all their lives, and probably really
Mm-hmm.
crave being outdoors, and potentially make choices of career that involve the
Mm-hmm.
outdoors, because they feel so at home there. and
Mm-hmm.
and obviously the opposite is happening for so many kids, where they just don't have that education. I don't mean in the formal sense. I just mean this connection to nature.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's a big part of forest schools to foster more, that environmentalist connection, foster a connection to nature, and hopefully help you grow up into an adult that makes more informed decisions when it comes to nature and the environment, right? But the research shows that we don't necessarily have to talk to children, particularly when they're young, about climate change and the environment and pollution and deforestation. That's a lot for them to carry. It's a lot of, it's just very dark
Fear.
and sad.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot of fear. What's really is important is to bring them to nature, establish that connection first, and that connection happens when they play in nature. That's why it's so significant, especially if you are interested, in environmentalism and, all these environmental issues, and future generations, like bringing children more into nature. So it just has so many aspects to it, with the movement, the learning, and creating, humans that care more about the world and the future of the planet. It all happens with those significant moments in your childhood.
Yeah.
Or those, seemingly simple moments of you just playing in the woods, but then, you find the salamanders and you realize that, gosh, this is not just this green wall. There's animals that live there. There's so much going on, and you start understanding it, the intricacies, maybe not conceptualizing it in your mind, but you start to really see those things. And you can't really get that just by reading about the Amazon forest and deforestation, get that more through your own experiences in your backyard.
So give us some examples of, so for parents who perhaps aren't that conversant with nature themselves because they haven't had it in their upbringing, or for grandparents who are walking with grandchildren, let's say, they know they want to get into nature with them. They're feeling hemmed in. They know that getting out into open space is going to help, but they're not kind of sure what to do. And obviously going on a long walk is not something that children, they love to walk as long as there's things along the way. So give us some ideas of ways that people can just get that inspiration going for children and get them interested.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think, maybe prioritizing, taking your child to the park, and that can just be a playground. I don't know, at least here in the States, playgrounds tend to be, in very green areas sometimes, so there's always nature around. But I think it's also important to note that nature is everywhere. Nature is even a weed growing through concrete, right? Nature is everywhere. So just kind of pointing out these things, to your child, because I think children have that natural fascination with these things. They're drawn to the weed or to the little ants crawling, so nature can be anywhere. It can be your own little, your backyard. Does it have a tree? Does it have a bush? That's nature. You don't necessarily have to be going to this huge park or, the Grand Canyon or,
No.
But yeah, hikes are awesome too. I mean, my kids, we've always taken hikes with them. I know not everyone has the time, but I find that even adults have the same benefits. You go on a hike, even if you feel like nature is not your thing, you just go out there and it's the fresh air, the effects of the forest, there are certain smells that your brain is wired to enjoy and appreciate and do well for you physiologically, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like putting yourself in those situations and just prioritizing that and seeing how that affects your child too. Because maybe it's not a thing for you, but just see how that affects your child. And sometimes children might be, especially if they're not used to it. Like my children at first were like that, especially my first child. And, just looking around. But, after a while, if you're just, consistent with it, you'll see it's the signs starting to show, the really positive signs.
And I know you are really good at modeling movement because you have a personal interest in the benefit of moving, not necessarily exercise or whatever. I know we're on the same page with that. And, I've seen you playing in a really childlike way, which I love. It's so inspiring. But obviously a lot of adults don't sort of feel that they can do that in the same way. again, how would you encourage people? Because, for example, the parents of the kids that you've got, wouldn't it be perfect, the kids in your school, if they were doing the same as you and getting more active and moving? Because then they're not only seeing this amazing teacher, jumping around
Mm.
and so on, but also seeing their adults, their caregivers, their parents, their grandparents, and so on. So how would you inspire people to move more with their kids, like their kids?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just looking back at how I started, this movement journey, the books by Katie Bowman, they were just so I was like, wow, this is amazing. I never thought about moving that way. I thought that adults are supposed to move just a certain way. And if you move any other way, that's weird. You should not be doing that. But it just opened and then I started remembering, how did I move as a kid? I moved so much. I did cartwheels and all that stuff. Um, so I just think, maybe find your inner child, and take baby steps. Who are you as a child? I mean, you moved a ton, right?
Yeah. What did you
just
love?
take baby
What did
steps.
you enjoy? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you like to spin? I mean, I'm not saying go all out and just start doing cartwheels, although I did start doing that. I kind of went a little crazy with the whole movement stuff. But I noticed that when I did those things, I just felt like the endorphins coming up back up again, like when I felt when I was a child, and that had just died down, because you just look at other adults around you and nobody's moving that way. And then I started to kind of become more like, you know what? Maybe they should be moving this way. Yeah. So I'm going to start doing cartwheels too, because it's good for me, So, so now
and your house, tell us a bit about your house, because I've always been really fascinated, because your house is basically, from what I've seen, a bit like an adventure playground inside. I remember I've seen slings. I remember you told me that it was like a yoga slings, and then also you had I don't know if this is the same house. You had a slide next to your stairs, or was that a previous house?
Yeah, it was a previous house. My husband built a slide going down the stairs, and that was fun. Yeah, I mean, it kind of shows my evolution with movement, because I went from the house has to look a certain way to being all in with movement. We got to hang, swings and bars and all that stuff where we are the most. That's one of Katie Bowman's main messages, right? You got to see them to use them. If they're tucked away, you're not using them. And my kids, obviously move a lot as children. And so we just went all in, and somehow I convinced my husband to just start hanging things. And now that we still have it. And my school kids do use our swings. So it's part of my program. I still want to, get that movement in. So, but yeah,
and your ceilings are okay. They haven't fallen down.
Right. Yeah, because our living room is a 1920s log cabin. So the beams are exposed. But at our previous house, my husband did have to build a whole, make it a little stronger and more visible, where we were hanging. Yeah. So you do have to there's a bit of prep with that stuff, but man, it's so worth it. I mean, kids come here and they never want to leave. It's just there's so much movement and play.
And do your kids continue really to use them? They don't sort of become part of the furniture, in inverted commas?
I think they do use it. That's a good question. Recently, I don't know if it's maybe they're getting a little older, but they still use it. They really enjoy the gymnastics rings. That just, the upper body movement, they're just getting that so naturally during the day. So yeah, I mean, they just go maybe through phases and stuff, but maybe we should kind of move them around a little just to kind of make it look new again. But it's there, and I find myself using it too. I need that stretch every day.
Lovely. Yeah. And your kids are at traditional schools then?
They actually go to a nature school, an elementary nature school. I mean, one of the reasons is the movement part. There's no desks, so they're they're still doing a lot of the academics and stuff like that, but it's very project based, and they're going on hikes and they're moving all day long, basically. Yeah, they come back covered in mud. I love it.
That's
I mean, the cleaning
amazing.
part is a little hard, but
But hey, it's still movement. It's all good movement, isn't
it's
it?
worth
That's
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the difference. No, it's fantastic. So obviously this people will also be listening who haven't got as much access to sort of the green spaces. What would you say in terms of children's movement and development and so on when they are more restricted and in a more sort of city-based setting?
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. I find that we move a lot when we go vacationing in cities. We take the stairs instead of the elevators. A lot of cities are more walkable, so we find ourselves
Mm,
walking more. It's really like kind of resisting the outsourcement of movement. So you look at an elevator, yeah, that's more convenient, but couldn't we take the stairs? Like, so I always encourage my kids to let's take the stairs. Like, let's go up to the
yeah,
fifth floor. Let's see how fast we
yeah.
can get up there. It's really becoming a kid again. And not
Mm,
like like I know like sometimes we see like seeing the stairs and we're like, oh gosh, gotta take the stairs. If the elevator breaks, it's like, oh, but if you see it as a kid and as an opportunity for you to do well for your body, like see it on the positive side. Like this is an opportunity for me to move my body. So let's take it
absolutely.
because there's so many opportunities to just sit down, right?
Yeah,
Take it where you see it and embrace it. And you'll find that your body starts craving more of that movement. I cannot return to a corporate job. I can't sit 9 hours a day like I used to. I just cannot. Like my body will just start like raising those red flags. Like you got to get up, go do something else, and then come back. But don't sit here for 3 hours.
no,
I would just sit for 5 hours and not even notice it.
yeah,
So yeah, take movement wherever you see it, and
yeah.
movement doesn't have to look like exercise, right? It's just like
Absolutely not.
natural
And
movement.
that's the
Mm-hmm.
lovely thing about when you do have children in your lives, because then the play is more automatic, and the way that children sort of encourage you to move is more playful. So you are naturally moving all the time. Even and as well, you're
Mm-hmm.
clearing
Yeah.
up Lego all the time. So you're
Yeah.
down on
Yeah.
your hands and your
Yeah.
knees, there's stuff
Oh yeah.
everywhere and you're kind of trying to create a space within it so that you're not tripping over it and so on. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
part of the problem comes when, like me, you have teenage kids and they are
Mm.
not moving in the same way. For me, I have three boys, they're all taller than me. So it's a very
Mm-hmm.
sort of different thing, where movement suddenly changes. And that's why I really believe that it's
Mm.
important, even at that stage, we're really modeling good movement skills, even as adults. And
Mhm.
so, and even though they are teenagers and sort of perhaps becoming more self-conscious, when we are going out and we're sort of moving around city or even on walks, they still want to play. They absolutely want to
Mhm.
always naturally climb on things. There's kind of like that goat mentality where
Mm.
you want to get higher always, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to sort of spin around something. They still have that feeling, and I'm quite led by that, where I want to just do the same. Why would I not follow in that? I think there is. I
Mhm.
often will get messages back when I'm doing something sort of on a public space where it's like my incredibly mini parkour level, where I'm just moving
Mhm.
around in a public space, and people will sort of respond in a way of like, well, almost like I'm not respecting the environment because I'm using it in the wrong
Uh,
way, even though it's a really solid
uh,
railing or whatever. And yet the kids will
right,
just spin round it, and it's okay for them to do it, but not okay for us. So it,
right.
it's, it,
Yeah.
things change, but I think it's really important that we do still model that, allowing them to explore their surroundings, no matter their surroundings,
Mhm.
I think is really key.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a cultural shift needs to happen. It's not I don't know if cultural or societal, right? This expectation that if you're an adult, you're supposed to move a certain way, and but I don't know. I feel like if more of us do it and are just more confident about it and just embrace
Yeah,
it, and yeah,
yeah,
I started going to yeah. My kids don't go to playgrounds that much anymore, being in school and stuff. But when we would go to playgrounds, I would just be like, "This is an opportunity for me to move." Yes, I do want to go on my phone. I want to sit down. I want to relax, but this is an opportunity. for me to go move, and also to bond with my child. So I just get up and like start, playing these games with them, and I'd be like
Yeah.
the only mom moving around. Like you climb
Yeah.
up, you slide down, you land. Like all these different movements that you're doing. And yeah, the
Yeah.
bonding was just amazing. So it was like a win-win. That my phone, looking back, that had I been on my phone, I feel like for me it would have been an opportunity cost, like just
Yeah.
seeing like the two examples, like, kind of like in those movies that show you the one example and like side by side,
Yes.
like what's happening,
Sliding
what's not
doors. Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Sliding
No,
doors. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But unfortunately, I was that parent sat at the side because
Oh, I was a lot too.
I was not, I just hadn't found the world of natural movement. I wasn't enabled by, as you say, Katie Bowman's books or by any
Mm-hmm.
of the sort of playful movement that I now know about. So, I
Mm-hmm.
regret that I didn't. But even now, if my kids, even though they're older, are sort of attracted towards a play thing in a park or whatever, I'll be there with them for sure. And
Yeah. And
uh
how cool is that for them
and
to,
it's so
how
fun.
neat for them to see you? Like, they're bonding with you. Like, oh my gosh, I get to like, do this with my mom. Like, I
Well,
never
you
had that
say
experience with
that,
my mom when I was
but
older.
then
Really?
it gets to a certain age where it's like, oh mom, I'm
It's
so
embarrassing, mom.
embarrassed.
I'm
Yeah.
starting to see a bit of that with my 10-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, it creeps in those tween years for sure. And
Yeah.
then it all
But I think
changes.
they'll look back, maybe 20 years from now when they have their own kids and be like, man, I used to do this with my mom. This was
Yeah.
fun. We used to
Yeah.
go in that log over there. I mean, it's such a neat memory.
And then hopefully as well as a grandparent that you will be, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is why one of the main reasons that I keep moving the way I do and that I'm so fixated on ensuring that my body is in as good shape as it can be functionally and practically, so that I can then be that grandparent who is really happy playing on the ground with them for as long as they want me there, but also is willing to take a few little risks, so which they are not seeing in other people around them, to make sure that it is
Mm-hmm.
modeling that good behavior. And
Yeah.
multi-generational play is so beneficial because even in many societies still around the world, there it is much more multi-generation. People live together and they
Mm-hmm.
learn from what they see around them. And even
Mm-hmm.
grandparents are still working very hard in sort of manual tasks and being very physical, where often
Mm-hmm.
in our Western culture, we're not seeing that so much. They're not seeing
Mm-hmm.
that sort of that level of movement. And therefore, obviously we get
Right.
into this narrative that as you get old, you slow down, or you should slow down, or it should happen naturally,
Mm-hmm.
which none of which is
Right.
necessarily needed. That doesn't need to be the case. And my belief is
Mm-hmm.
that retirement is about getting going, in a
Mm-hmm.
way,
Yeah. It's
to
almost
try
like
and
that's when life starts.
yeah, and to try and counteract anything that could be becoming more difficult in your body, because of the aging
Mm-hmm.
process. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I was just to wrap up, it's been a lovely conversation. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and not having young children myself anymore, but remembering it vividly, I'm very envious of you
Mm-hmm.
having such an amazing environment to provide, not just to your kids, but to other children, and seeing the benefits that you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing. So what would you say to people about whether it's worth, if they've got really young children, for example, or their grandchildren are very young, about forest schools and the importance of forest school play, even or searching for one that is entirely a forest school, or searching for schools that have forest days, for example. What would you say
Mm-hmm.
really makes forest schooling stand out, and why is it such an important thing in your opinion for children
Mm-hmm.
growing up?
I think it's returning to basics. I think forest school is a return to basics. It's a return to how human beings have always learned, and we've taken that away from human children, from children. You know, for the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 120 years. Like we've removed that, right? With the Industrial Revolution and all that stuff. And now a lot of the research that, in education, in child development is pointing towards that return. That we've just kind of moved so far away from that. And the children are telling us, like the research is telling us that children are suffering. They're telling us in the data, there's a lot more depression, anxiety. They're telling us that this isn't working, and we need to kind of start maybe looking at how it is in basic terms. How do children learn in basic terms? Let's not complicate things so much. I highly recommend if forest school, like full-time forest school isn't something that you could do, but at least look into maybe in the summers, let them go to a forest school program. Let them experience nature and the forest school approach, at least in the summer. Or if you have a preschool child, let them go to forest school once a week. That is enough right there. Dip your toes in there and see how your child reacts. Because I feel like a lot, if not every single parent that puts their kid in forest school, they end up becoming the biggest fans because they just see the benefits in their children. I hear that so much. They're just like, I love this forest school approach to play, the nature. My kids are thriving. Like the word thriving is so central to forest schooling.
Yeah,
they really are thriving here.
And it's sadly not necessarily the case in a lot of children's situations. The word thriving you couldn't genuinely use. So it's amazing that so many of your parents are saying that, because it truly must be, there must be a really big ticket there to how we should be incorporating that in all types of schooling.
Yeah, and I think there's a beginning of that return, even in the more traditional schools, where I see some schools having like a forest day. A lot of schools, they back up to the woods, and they're starting to kind of explore that a little more. So I think there is a beginning of a shift. So it's hopeful. I'm hopeful
really
for
is.
the future. Yeah,
that's good. That's a lovely note to end on, a nice positive note. So thank you so much for sharing your time today, and your experiences. It was really lovely to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for giving me this platform to talk about this. I could talk for like ages.
I always love hearing my guests' movement stories or learning from them about topics they're passionate about. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.